Hello everyone, I'm Genie, and today I'm gonna be having this video about what I've learned in my last 30 days, 1 month, right? From learning how to animate and how to create sprites in pixel art. Now, as learning implies, I'm a freaking beginner, right? This is not gonna be a course, not gonna be a tutorial, not gonna be a guide. There are mainly two reasons for me to make this video and this series and document everything. The first one is that by teaching, I'm gonna learn better, I'm gonna store information better, I'm gonna assimilate, right? Assimilate is a word? Consolidate it better. And I know that's the first one, so selfish, so selfish. And the second one is maybe you figure something out with my struggle. So why have I chosen to go for animations out of the gate? There is one very important reason why, and that is repetition. So I did some digging, I did some research before starting, and I saw that through animation, I would have to redraw a bunch of poses, right? I got how important poses were, and the in-betweens, I would have to redraw a lot of things, so I wouldn't have to think, oh, okay, so I finished this sprite, what I'm gonna do now. So that kind of saves it there, just to put the repetition in, because I know how important that is for learning. Besides, I also need to learn how to make game assets for my main objective. So, why not start with that already, since there are so many benefits. I also worked on trying to find a process that works for me specifically, because, some people work different. But as a beginner, I think, I figured that what worked for me best was to go for, and I tried many different angles on how to start. Do I start by blocking the thing? Do I start by, drawing the silhouette, just the outline? How do I do this thing? So what I figured out that works best for me is to go for first the block out, which is pretty much, just drawing the limbs with different colors. So the head is one color, torso is one color, the two arms is one color each, and the legs are also one color each. Then I go for the structure, which is pretty much giving the character their main characteristics. So I chose a rogue, for instance, to firstly work on. And that entails that, this structure part is drawing daggers and drawing the cloak. And then at last I would be shading. And here's the reason why that works for me. First, I'm a beginner, right? So I need to understand how the process of animating works, how the core of the animation works. And the second reason is that I figured one thing, at least for me, at one point I noticed that it doesn't matter how beautiful the structure is and how the shading is amazing. Not that I'm able to make an amazing shader, but stick with me. To me, that didn't really matter, because I figured that if the block out, if the core of the animation is bad, then there's no salvation. Like, I'm gonna give an analogy. So let's think that the animation is shit, right? Now you grab that shit and you put it on a cup.
It becomes the cup. You put into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot.
Now stick with me, I'm going somewhere with this. You put it on a cup. Doesn't matter how much sprinkle of candy, how much icing, how much frosting you put on top of that, that's not becoming a cupcake. That's only gonna be shit with frosting on top of it. There's no saving, so the foundation that needs to be there. Maybe if you put, enough frosting and enough icing until it becomes like, the shit becomes like 5%. I'm going too far with this already. So moving on. Another reason why I think that polish is more of a late game thing and, repetition quantity is better is because, as a beginner, there is only so much you can do with shading. I don't have enough experience to make the shading so great that I'm able to work on top of a really bad block out. So for me, the repetition of making that block out and focusing on making that better and expending less time on shading, I think for me is beneficial, because I build this foundation that I can work on later. I can work on top of that. That's what I mean. Now, what surprised me the most was how much iteration guided, iteration oriented this process is. I knew that it was iteration oriented, but not this much, because in the end, the process of making the sprites for me has been a lot of trial and error. And upon seeing other people, other videos of people coming up with concepts at first, there's a lot of iteration. Like, okay, so this is kind of working, and then you do something, it stops working, and then you iterate again. So you erase something, and then you put the angle of the leg somewhere else, for instance. You put the angle of the arm somewhere else. It's a lot of iteration, So, and this is really interesting, because on seeing things on the internet like people drawing and you see like they're amazing, and oh my god, I'm so bad at this thing because they come up with it instantly. You know, for me, at least I'm a beginner. Maybe in 30 years I'm gonna become that guy that just, you know, grabs a pen, grabs the mouse and makes some godly looking art. Not that guy yet. So, you know, there's a lot of iteration, and that surprised me how much of it is iteration oriented. Now, what I think was harder than I expected was how much difficult it is to put what I have on my head that I thought it was simple on paper. Because when you think of it, you think, okay, so I'm gonna animate a guy walking. You think, yeah, all right, that should be simple, right? I mean, I walk every day. I know how it works. You know, I grab one foot, you know, just lift it, put it up, put it in front of me, and then rinse and repeat. Yeah, but animating it, it's not that simple. I had to do a lot of observation of myself. Like, okay, so I lift my heel first, and then I push it, or do I just lift my foot? And what happens with my knee once I do that? Does it bend? Does it remain mostly stretched? You know, these type of things that you never really think about because you do that every day. It becomes a bit difficult to wrap your head around at first. And that's why I think it's so good to have a lot of repetition. It's because, you know, you repeat it a lot of times. So the concept kind of gets into your head even if you don't even try that much, because you're repeating and you're iterating so much. That's what works for me, you know. Another thing that surprisingly hard is actually starting, you know, and stop watching a bunch of videos of people telling you how to do it and just, you know, staring at that blank, you know, canvas and just actually put something in there. I noticed that what works for me, and as you can see on my walk animation, it ended up really bad. But what worked for me was actually just putting something there and letting the iteration kind of make it better. It still looked bad. I think my walking animation was the worst of all of them. And that comes to the next thing that I found really challenging, is actually making things half decent. When you see people drawing, when you see people actually making the sprites, you think, okay, so it's just a bunch of pixels. Come on, how hard can that be? You know, it's pixel art. It's not even hand draw, you know. But I think not having art fundamentals and not knowing how to do these things in the first place, they are still hard, because I feel like the foundation is the same, you know, like working with the shapes and working with the blocks, you know, and like sculpting it, which is, I think, pixel art and probably digital art in general, but I don't know digital art, but pixel art is a lot like sculpting. I think you just that's what I mean about iteration. You make it rough and then you go on sculpting. That's what has been working for me a lot. So all that said, I think what I'm gonna be working on next is working on VFX and UI, because I'm gonna keep practicing characters and creatures and stuff, because I'm gonna need them a lot. But I think I'm gonna work on UI and VFX next. I'm probably gonna do some cinematic as well, because that really makes my brain, you know, happy. Because I did one on my phone. Probably gonna leave it running as I speak. There was so much pleasure in doing that. There was a lot of work, but seeing the end result was so fun. But I'm probably gonna do that as well, because I want to get good at it, and eventually I'm gonna be applying it on a game project. I think that's the route that I'm taking here. But if you're also learning pixel art or game dev, for instance, which is a very interesting topic, like I'd be curious to know what were your challenges and how you fixed them. You know, I know it's the fixing part is really intuitive. It's about a bunch of iteration and research, but you know, yeah, share your experiences. Otherwise it's just gonna be me and not much interaction. So yeah, that's it for this video. See you on the next one.